But it has to begin with this mindset. As you go into 2025, here's what you need to just write this on your forehead. 2025 is a stewardship. It is not your life. It is not your year. It is God's. Because you, if you're a Christian, you were bought with the precious blood of Jesus Christ, and you are not your own. And so if we can bring that attitude into how we plan for the new year, it changes everything. Because then you start to ask, okay, if I'm a steward, if this year's a stewardship, what is required of stewards? What does the Bible say that is required of a steward? Well, it actually tells us directly, 1 Corinthians 4:2. And this is the Apostle Paul. He says, now it is required of stewards that they be found faithful. So faithfulness is the objective. As you approach any goal, as you approach the new year, you approach, how am I going to plan this out? I want to be found faithful. I want to be standing here or sitting here at the end of the year, December 2025, and look back and say, I was faithful with the year. I treated wisely and well the things the Lord entrusted to me, my finances, my relationships, all these different areas, my walk with the Lord. All of these things, I was more faithful this year than I was the year before. But that doesn't happen by accident, right? No one stumbles into faithfulness. It requires grace. Yes, is the Lord working in us both to will and to work for his good pleasure. But it also requires us to, as we're empowered by God, to be diligent in pursuing faithfulness in all areas of life. And so if you're familiar at all with the stuff I do, if you've read my book or taken any of our courses or read any of my articles, I often reference these domains of stewardship. And this is the idea that you have different areas of your life that you're called to be faithful in, right? And each of these are places that in different seasons of life, we're being varying degrees of faithful in, right? Different times of life, we're kind of like, I'm doing well, not doing so well there. I'm living up to what God's called me to do. I'm not living up to what God's called me to do. And the reason this is helpful is that it gives you a way to systematically approach trying to improve and grow in faithfulness in all these things the Lord's entrusted to you. So we're going to put this to work today as we think about the new year. But just a reminder, I already said this, but faithfulness doesn't happen by accident. And so what I want to encourage you with, and if you walk away with nothing else from this, I want you to plan for faithfulness in 2025. Plan for it. Don't leave it up to chance. Don't let this be another year that just slips by where you're kind of like, wow, where did the year go? I just kind of like was carried along by the tyranny of the urgent. I was just responsive. I wasn't proactive about anything. And I'm in the same place I was last year. Let this be a year where you plan for the faithfulness that you want to see and the growth you want to see. So a couple principles that I want you to have as we go into the actual practical part of this. So principles of Christian planning: don't not plan. That is a double negative. I know that. And what I mean is do plan. Wisdom requires planning. It is not unchristian to plan, right? Even in the wisdom literature, very often wisdom and planning are treated as virtually synonymous, right? Go to the ant, O sluggard, consider her ways and be wise. I observe the ant because she plans ahead for the season where she won't have grain, right? The sluggard, the lazy person in the Proverbs, much of their issue is that they're not planning ahead. They only think about today. And that's why they're gluttonous. That's why they're lazy. They're just thinking about the pleasures and the comforts of today where they don't plan ahead. Wisdom is planning, and we're called to do it. But at the same time, don't plan arrogantly. This is where the warning comes in. James talks about this in chapter 4. Come now, you who say, tomorrow we'll go to this and such a place and make trade and make profit there. And James chastises them, and he says, no, like you shouldn't talk that way. You're boasting, and it's arrogant, and that boasting is evil. Instead, he says, you ought to say, if the Lord wills. So whatever plans we make here, whatever you come away with in terms of goals from our time together, recognize you got to hold those with an open hand. The Lord is the one in charge of everything. And I prefer his plans to my own anyway, right? But that doesn't mean you don't plan. You still plan, but you just be prepared that he may redirect you. And we invite that. A third just negative thing on principles for Christian planning: don't plan unrealistically. right? Don't do something crazy. Don't make goals that you know you have no possibility of ever reaching this year. If you have a big, huge thing like that, that's more of an aspiration. Think, as I mentioned before, 5 years into the future, maybe I can work towards that. But be realistic, stretch yourself, but not so much that it's just something that's completely impossible. Positively, do plan for holiness. Make sure as you're planning for this new year that part of your thought patterns, part of what you're pursuing in 2025 is growing in grace, right? Walking closely with the Lord. When we talk about those domains of stewardship, all of those the center of that little donut I showed you earlier is the spiritual life, your walk with the Lord. Everything flows from that, right? He's the true vine. If you're not walking closely with Christ, you're not going to be faithful in any area of life. Do plan for relationships, be intentional, right? Might mean having goals around your relationship with your spouse or your kids or friends or church involvement. But make sure you're not just thinking. A lot of times we get to New Year's and we're only thinking, okay, I have a health goal or a financial goal. Like or a career goal. We slip into only focusing on certain categories. Make sure you're thinking broader than that. But above all, do plan for growth. It is good to be growing. Living things grow. Do plan to be growing in faithfulness in every area that the Lord's entrusted to you. Because remember, 2025 is a stewardship